Now, now what happens? How the surgery takes place? How the treatment takes place in the hospital? This we are going to see now. So Tricky was hospitalized and now kept under observation by James Harriet. And being aware, James Harriet was knowing completely about the disease, about the illness of Tricky. Tricky had become ill not because of being away from food, but because of being overfed, and it was known by James Harriet properly. So when Tricky was hospitalized, Tricky was given no food by James Harriet, as James Harriet was knowing that the Tricky's health condition has deteriorated because of overfeeding. So he was given no food, no medicine, but plenty of water. Okay, you know what? So Tricky was kept by James Harriet without food, without medicine, and but plenty of water. And moreover, Tricky, whatever facilities were given to Tricky, being a rich lady, Mrs. Pampry used to give Tricky a lot of facility. She used to spend too much on dog. Okay, she used to give each and everything, whatever she could, to eat to that dog. But all the facilities have been carved out in the hospital, and Tricky was left to be lived as the other dogs used to live in that hospital. So definitely Tricky was not given any food, any medicine, but plenty of water. For some days it continued. For 1 or 2 days, Tricky did not do anything. Tricky kept on becoming silent. Tricky did not move, did not do any physical activity too much. Tricky remained silent for 1 or 2 days, but gradually one thing Tricky saw in the hospital, that the other dogs used to snatch the food items from each other. They used to fight each other. They used to run here and there. Tricky kept on seeing all these conditions, and gradually the desire of doing all those things came into Tricky too. It means Tricky got attracted by the natural behavior of dogs in the hospital, and Tricky desired to do the same, to snatch the food and eat, and to run after the dogs like this. So Tricky got mixed up with the dogs, and gradually the time came when Tricky also started doing like the other dogs in the hospital. Tricky started snatching the food, started eating the food in such a way that the other dogs used to eat, and he used to run after the dogs as well. He started fighting with the dogs as well. So everything was going as a normal dog used to do, going with Tricky as a normal dog used to do. Mrs. Pampry, when this, so the overall what happened after 2 or 3 days, the health condition of Tricky started to improve. There was an improvement in the health condition. This message was sent to Mrs. Pampry by James Harriet. James Harriet, when sent this message to Mrs. Pampry, Pampry was quite happy. She was quite happy to see the improvement, to know about the improvement. And Mrs. Pampry thought that for better improvement, for more improvement, something energetic should be sent to Tricky, and for making, once again, as Mrs. Pampry's thinking was completely different. Being a rich lady, she wanted to give all the things that could strengthen the health of Tricky. So, when Mrs. Pampry came to know about the improvement, she started sending eggs for strengthening Tricky. Bottles of wine, bottles, and it is really funny to know that a dog was offered bottles of wine and bottles of brandy. So definitely Mrs. Pampry was very much, she was very much fond of Tricky, so so much fond of Tricky that she started sending all these things, eggs, bottles of wines and bottles of brandy for strengthening Tricky for the fast recovery of Tricky. And after knowing, so when she came to know about the health improvement, she started sending all these things. So it was accepted by James Harriet, but being a veterinary surgeon, Harriet was knowing about the diet that should have been maintained for the better improvement of Tricky. Although Harriet did not tell anything on this issue of sending all these things for Tricky, Harriet accepted all these things, but he never gave eggs to eat, bottles of wine and brandy to Tricky, as he was knowing these all things are not going to improve the condition of Tricky. So he never gave all these things. On the contrary, these things were consumed by James Harriet. So it was really a beneficial thing for James Harriet to keep Tricky under his observation, because on the name of Tricky, James Harriet was getting eggs, bottles of wine and bottles of brandy for free by Mrs. Pantry. Although Mrs. Pantry was sending all these things for Tricky, but James Harriet was consuming the things himself. So all these things were consumed by James Harriet. Overall, Mrs. Pantry thought that these things have been given to Tricky, and because of which Tricky will improve fast. But this was just we can say the self-thinking of that Mrs. Pantry, but it was not in reality. Tricky had a lot of exercise. In the hospital, what used to take place with Tricky is that Tricky was given the natural condition to live. Tricky was not given very comfortable bed to sleep, very comfortable surroundings to live. Tricky was given normal surroundings as the normal dogs used to get, and these surroundings helped Tricky to be mixed up with the dog, to do the actions done by the normal dogs, and Tricky was improving because of getting the natural environment. Tricky used to do a lot of exercises and fun at the surgery. The only thing which was required was the company of the dogs, and this really helped Tricky when he got the company of the dogs. He had a lot of fun, he had a lot of exercise at surgery. It means Tricky was being treated without any medicine. No any medicine, no any surgery was being done, and Tricky was being treated in such a way. Soon the time came when he was completely recovered and transformed into a muscular dog without any medicine or surgery. It means that natural conditions provided at the hospital, provided at the surgery, was so beneficial for Tricky that Tricky became muscular, active, and a normal dog as usual very soon because of getting a natural company. Now, when Tricky's condition was completely recovered, although Tricky was completely recovered and Tricky was to be sent to Mrs. Pantry very soon, but it was a loss for for James Harriet. The reason is that James Harriet wanted to keep Tricky for some more days, just because he was knowing that that Tricky's presence in the hospital can benefit James Harriet, as on the name of Tricky he can get the same thing, the eggs, the bottles of wine and the bottles of brandy every day by Mrs. Pantry. As he was consuming, it was really we can say like a treat for James Harriet, a treat for free for James Harriet, as he was getting all those things every day. on the name of Tricky. But but he gave the information to Mrs. Pampri about the recovery of Tricky, about Tricky's improved health condition, and permitted that Tricky can be taken away home from the hospital. Now, Mrs. Pampri came to take Tricky. She came and she was very happy and full of gratitude towards James Harriet, as she thought that James Harriet had treated Tricky in the hospital, because of which Tricky, who was about to die, as per Mrs. Pampri, who was about to die, who was really in a very bad physical condition, has improved now. Okay, has improved now, and it is just because of the surgery at the hospital by James Harriet. So this surgery was named, this surgery was said by Mrs. Pampri as a triumph of surgery, a victory of surgery. And this is how Mrs. Pampri got her Tricky back in a very, very improved health conditions. Now Mrs. Pampri had got her dog, her dog in such active mood that it was earlier. So this was the chapter about a triumph of surgery.